The silence in this office tower, 30 stories above the churning traffic, is a deliberate strategic lie. The air conditioning hums, the glass reflects a sky promising vast, effortless wealth. But beneath the veneer of quiet, professional competence, this place is a sonic battlefield. We must dispense with the comfortable illusion that strategy is confined to spreadsheets and legal documents. The true, critical combat occurs in the milliseconds following a provocation. Every email is a tactical volley. Every delay is a subtle aggression designed to induce anxiety, and every provocation, no matter how minor, is calculated to pull you off the wall and into the mud where the enemy can engage you on their terms. This is asymmetrical warfare waged on the terrain of your own nervous system. We walk these halls, disciplined, armored, and acutely aware of the mission. Yet the enemy finds the chinks in the plating consistently. That flash of heat, when the junior partner questions your authority in a critical meeting, the acidic, calculated insult delivered by a rival via an encrypted third-party message, the sudden public dismissal of your recent strategic input by a superior who feels threatened. That brief, white-hot surge is the moment we identify the trap. We feel the biological imperative to engage, to crush the insolence instantly, and to demonstrate absolute, undeniable dominance. This is not intellectual weakness. This is primal, evolutionarily hardwired circuitry firing exactly as it was designed to fire millennia ago. The noise is not the external threat. The noise is the internal siren screaming for immediate, violent retaliation. We are creatures forged in an environment of rapid triage. A sudden, unambiguous threat, the shadow of a predator, the challenge of a rival male, required a sudden, violent answer to ensure the survival of the individual and the continuation of the pack's genetic code. Hesitation meant death. The brain, our ancestral hardware, still operates under the outdated operational mandate of the Pleistocene. It floods the system with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and cortisol, not to facilitate thoughtful, nuanced negotiation, but to power the muscles for immediate fight or flight. In the modern financial capital, that adrenaline hits our fingers, driving us toward the keyboard, compelling us to draft the definitive, irrefutable counterattack that will leave the enemy annihilated, their competence destroyed, and their insolence crushed under the weight of our intellectual superiority. We seek the perfect verbal kill shot, but what we mistake for a survival instinct is, in the contemporary strategic environment, a fatal design flaw, a vulnerability that our most calculating adversaries exploit with surgical precision. That rush, that dopamine hit derived from the anticipated cathartic closure of confrontation, is the poison. It is the tactical blunder engineered into our own operating system. They throw a cheap, disposable grenade, a quick, thoughtless slight costing them zero emotional or strategic capital, and we instantly dive onto it, initiating an explosive defense sequence. We sacrifice our mental position, our valuable time, our composure, and our focus to neutralize a threat that, if left unattended, would have fizzled into dust in minutes. We are losing the war not on the balance sheet, but in the reflexive, uncontrolled reaction to minor, opportunistic irritants. We surrender our most valuable strategic asset, inner peace, mental capital, intellectual bandwidth, the instant we choose to respond to something that did not strategically demand our energy. The strength we seek, the superiority we crave, is preserved not in the counterpunch, but in the deliberate, crushing weight of absolute non-response. The battlefield of the mind is always lost when we allow the enemy to set the terms of engagement. The first casualty of the quick retort is always our own strategic sovereignty. To understand the architecture of this necessary, crushing non-response, we must look not to the quiet halls of academia, but to the men who perfected the tactical withdrawal of attention while living under the immediate existential threat of political and physical combat. We turn our gaze to Rome, specifically to the unyielding granite of Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger. Cato stood against the gathering storm of Caesar's ambition, a whirlwind of expediency, corruption, and naked power grabs. Cato was a man whose rigid principles made him a constant, unavoidable target, and whose severe, unwavering moral superiority drove his opponents to increasingly petty, desperate provocations. He was the designated antagonist, the immovable object in the path of the relentless political machine. Imagine the Senate floor, the most toxic psychological arena in the history of the Western world, a cacophony of ambition, spite, and self-preservation, where reputations were shredded and lives were ruined by well-placed invective and manufactured scandal. Cato, known for his relentless honesty, his brutal refusal to engage in flattery, and his severe lack of tolerance for the pervasive corruption infecting the late Republic, was not merely a politician, he was a mirror. He reflected the ugliness of the age back onto those who perpetuated it. Naturally, he became the primary target for men like Publius Clodius Pulcher, the notorious populist demagogue and Caesar's most useful fool, a master of low-level disruptive terrorism. We focus on one particular skirmish, a grueling legislative session where Clodius, unable to defeat Cato on logic, policy, or fiscal responsibility, descended into sheer, personalized humiliation, a classic example of a resource drain attack. Clodius, fully aware that Cato despised the manipulation of the plebeian masses and the cheap tactics of populist theater, organized his loyal band of thugs, gladiators, and sycophants, the collegia, to attend the Senate session. As Cato began to speak, attempting to hold the line against a piece of predatory populist legislation that would have financially crippled the state for short-term political gain, Clodius signaled the attack. The thugs began to jeer, to howl, and to launch not just verbal abuse, but actual refuse, stones, and filth toward the podium where Cato stood. This was not random violence. This was a deliberate, tactical operation designed to shatter Cato's famous composure, to force him, the symbol of Roman virtue and strategic discipline, to descend into a base, furious, unseemly brawl. The chaos escalated instantly. The noise was overwhelming, a physical barrier intended to shatter the framework of reasoned debate. Cato was physically dragged from the Senate floor, jostled, insulted, and covered in grime and human filth. Any other man, any general whose honor was insulted, any senator whose authority was violated, any executive whose integrity was publicly questioned, would have exploded. They would have lashed out with security demands, initiated legal action, or engaged in a screaming match of reciprocal denunciation designed to set the record straight. They would have given the enemy the energy they craved. They would have confirmed by their rage that the stones had drawn strategic blood. But Cato did not fight back. He did not raise his voice. He did not engage the thugs, nor did he visibly tremble with indignation. He permitted himself to be forcibly removed from the chamber, and then came the moment of absolute, crushing, devastating superiority. Cato returned. He did not rush back for revenge or for theatrical victimhood. He walked slowly, deliberately, back through the same aisle, past the same crowd that had just physically abused him. He did not acknowledge the smirking, victorious Clodius. He did not wipe the filth from his robes in a dramatic gesture of martyrdom. He simply stood back in his place, waited for the room to momentarily lull in sheer, bewildered curiosity, because his return was unexpected, and without the slightest reference to the physical assault or the humiliation that had just occurred. He started his speech again from the very first sentence. He treated the physical attack, the profound humiliation, and the venomous attempt to silence him as merely an unfortunate, irrelevant intermission. He denied the enemy the satisfaction of his anger. He denied them the victory of his distraction. He denied them the fuel of his response. Cato demonstrated with the devastating finality of a perfectly executed strategic maneuver that their entire, elaborate physical and verbal assault had been less consequential than a temporary gust of wind or an unavoidable street delay. This was not merely courage. This was the tactical application of absolute, unassailable self-possession. Cato understood a principle that governs every modern boardroom. The highest form of discipline is refusing to acknowledge the existence of the petty threat. His silence was the weapon that rendered their noise impotent and their violence strategically null. We must deconstruct this maneuver using the cold, sharp logic of the Stoic armory, which is, in essence, a deep manual for psychological warfare defense. Why does Cato's non-response register as such a devastating counterstrike? The provocation itself is never the threat. The provocation is simply a delivery system for a specific type of cargo, a toxic payload designed to breach your emotional fortifications. Our immediate frantic desire to correct the record, to have the last word, or to defend our honor is fundamentally irrational because it attributes massive strategic value to something external and chaotic, something that, by definition, is outside our sphere of command. When we react, we are operating strictly within the enemy's theater of operations. We consume their poison narrative, the lie, the slight, the slander, and we metabolize it into a visible, chaotic energy that they can feed upon. We give them the critical intelligence report they desire. They know exactly what buttons to push, and they know the exact extent of the damage they inflicted. They have successfully controlled your emotional state, thus controlling your time and diverting your strategic focus from the objectives that truly matter. The next quarter's earnings, the long-term acquisition, the integrity of your personal strategic trajectory. The moment we reply, we cease to be strategists. We become mere chemical reactants in a third-party experiment. We become predictable. The enemy seeks not just to hurt you, but to move you. Their strategic goal is the displacement of your mental resources. They want your focus off the main objective and fixed entirely on them, even momentarily. By responding, you grant them veto power over your strategic agenda. The Stoic wisdom is the ultimate tactical protocol against this internal surrender. We look at the insult or the slight and immediately invoke the dichotomy of control. Is this action, this email, this public shaming, this subtle betrayal within my control? No. It is the exclusive domain of the other person's character, their flaws, their chosen malice, their strategic bankruptcy. If it is external, it is merely data, a fluctuation in the background noise of the universe, irrelevant to the integrity of your internal command structure. The only thing truly within our sovereign control is the response mechanism, the internal decision-making process. And here is where silence becomes a weapon of mass preservation. By refusing to respond, we are not simply being passive or polite. We are enacting a strategy of critical resource hoarding. We deny the enemy access to our mental capital and our emotional reserves. Every second spent drafting a witty, devastating reply, every minute stewing over the perceived injustice, or every cycle spent seeking external validation for our righteousness is time stolen directly from our primary, critical mission, the execution of our own life's purpose. We must understand the neurochemical sabotage at play. When the insult lands, the brain releases cortisol, the stress hormone, and adrenaline. This triggers a negative feedback loop. The response validates the threat, which triggers more stress. Simultaneously, the brain often offers a tiny, insidious reward, the rush of dopamine associated with the anticipation of resolution or revenge. We confuse this temporary false sense of power with actual strategic effectiveness. The great deception of anger is that it feels intensely productive. We confuse the furious rush of energy with true strategic power. But true power resides in the static, immovable core of the self, the inner citadel. To embrace the insult, the betrayal, the smear campaign with amor fati, To truly accept that this external chaos is simply the cost of operating in the human arena, the standard atmospheric pressure of high-level competition, is to strip the provocation of its toxicity instantly. It is saying, with every deliberate beat of silence, this aggression is not personal. It is merely an environmental condition, like rain, noise, or humidity, and I do not argue with the weather. My internal systems remain optimized, irrespective of external turbulence. Cato's return to the podium was an exercise in annihilating perceived injury. He demonstrated that the attack failed its primary strategic function, distraction. When we choose silence, we elevate the skirmish from a personal feud to an intellectual exercise in psychological superiority. We demonstrate a moral and strategic authority that cannot be argued, only observed. We prove that our internal agenda is so compelling, our focus so absolute, our mission so critical, that the enemy's best, most elaborate, most violent efforts are incapable of shifting the needle even 1 degree. The general who conserves his ammunition for the decisive battle, refusing to fire a single high-value round at shadows or minor scouting parties, is the one who understands tactical discipline. Silence is the critical conservation of force. The tactical necessity of silence is underscored by the modern landscape. We are engaged in the asymmetrical war of attention. Our opponents seek maximum emotional yield for minimal intellectual investment. They spam the system with cheap hostility, knowing the cost of our reaction is orders of magnitude greater than the cost of their initial volley. We must halt this exchange rate imbalance. By imposing the absolute, disciplined non-response, we make their cheap aggression economically unviable. If their investment of $1 in spite yields $0 in reaction, they will stop investing. If their investment of $1 in spite yields $100 of your time, attention, and professional reputation damage, they will escalate. The silence breaks the feedback loop and starves the aggressor of the validation they require to continue the attack. The transition from intellectual understanding to battlefield discipline requires a hardened 3-stage operational protocol. We must move beyond simply recognizing the trap and establish the automatic, institutionalized procedure for escaping it. In stage 1, immediate cognitive interruption. The moment the provocation arrives, that vibrating phone, that harsh tone, the public slight, we must treat the resulting internal heat not as a cue to act, but as an immediate, flashing red alert threat indicator. The veteran general does not rush headlong into the ambush. He stops, drops, and initiates a threat assessment protocol. Your internal instruction must be instantaneous and non-negotiable. Delay. We must create a critical gap, even a fraction of a second, an eternity in high-pressure conflict between the stimulus and the potential reflexive reaction. This gap is the battlefield where sovereignty is either lost or maintained. The method is simple, physical and brutal, designed to hijack the physical-chemical response. We must override the amygdala hijack before the message can travel from the limbic system to the hands and mouth. 1. Freeze and identify. Halt all digital and verbal movement. If you are standing, freeze your hands instantly. If you are sitting, lock your jaw. Do not lean toward the keyboard or open the reply window. Recognize the sensation of heat, the tightening chest, as the adrenaline signature. Label it. This is the enemy within. This is the attempt to steal my focus. 2. Controlled breach. Close your eyes for one controlled, deep, diaphragmatic breath. This single breath serves two functions. It introduces a physical pause that breaks the reflex arc, and it initiates a vagal nerve signal that begins to manually down-regulate the heart rate and the release of cortisol. 3. Deploy the metric. During that pause, you deploy the strategic assessment metric, which must be memorized and recited internally. Does this response advance my strategic objective, or does it merely satisfy my ego? 99% of the time, The honest answer is the latter. The ego craves the fight, the strategist craves the win. Do not confuse the transient, narcotic satisfaction of revenge with the cold, enduring success of strategic discipline. This gap, this deliberate interposition of thought, prevents the immediate, catastrophic surrender of resources. Stage 2. Tactical redirection of force. The energy generated by the slight, that boiling rush of adrenaline, the surging cortisol, the righteous indignation, cannot simply be suppressed or ignored. It is physical fuel. It must be channeled instantly and violently. This is the energy they intended for your destruction, but we seize it and repurpose it for our construction. The moment the immediate urge to retaliate subsides, that energy becomes a portable reserve. We must immediately divert the current. 1. Immediate disengagement from source. If the provocation was digital, close the screen instantly. Do not minimize, close the application completely. Remove the visual stimulus. If the slight occurred verbally, use a simple, non-committal phrase, duly noted, I will process that input, or thank you for the data, and physically vacate the immediate space. 2. Redirect a high-value mission. Immediately open a document, a ledger, or a file related to your most difficult, highest-value project. The project that moves your strategic needle forward 2 points, not the project that offers comforting busy work. The key is difficulty. The adrenaline must be spent on friction. 3. Physical transmutation. If the internal heat is too high for immediate intellectual work, leave the building and initiate a physically demanding movement. A fast, violent walk around the block, a series of hard push-ups against the wall, anything that burns the chemical residue of the conflict. The objective is to physically associate the provocation with productive labor. Every insult becomes a new weight added to your personal training regimen. The enemy has unwittingly gifted you an energetic boost, raw, aggressive fuel. It is your critical failure if you waste it on counter-gossip, defensive drafting, or reciprocal hostility. Silence in communication does not mean idleness in execution. It means diverting the fuel from the fire of conflict into the engine of your ambition. You must train your system to view conflict as a trigger for elevated performance. The insult is not pain. It is the starting gun for your next major output. Stage 3. The establishment of the barrier of disinterest. This is the long-term defense, the perpetual maintenance protocol against future infiltration and psychological siege. You must proactively cultivate a deep, philosophical indifference to the opinions of those who operate outside your circle of competency and absolute loyalty. This is not simple arrogance. It is highly disciplined tactical triage and the cultivation of an unshakable identity. 1. Daily mission review. Every morning, review the mission statement. I am here to execute X. All input that does not contribute demonstrably to X is classified as noise, clutter, or strategic distraction. This creates a filter that automatically dismisses 90% of provocations before they can even pierce the outer defenses. 2. The identity shift. We must train ourselves to view the incessant low-grade hostility of the financial or political theater not as personal attacks on our character, but as predictable environmental pollution, the inescapable runoff of other people's psychological turbulence. The moment you perceive the slight as a reflection of their chaotic internal landscape, their flaws, and their competitive fear, rather than a factual indictment of your worth, the emotional barrier becomes impenetrable. They are arguing with a phantom, their distorted, fear-driven perception of you, not with the reality of your executed discipline. You are not obligated to validate their delusion with a response. You are merely observing their internal struggle projecting outward. 3. Premeditation of evils. The Stoics prepared for the attack by envisioning it in advance. Spend 2 minutes each week deliberately anticipating potential slights. Envision the email, the public criticism, the betrayal. Run the simulation and practice the non-response. Pre-decide your silence. By rehearsing the injury in a low-stakes environment, you inoculate yourself against the shock, rendering the live event strategically inert. The only surprise the enemy can deliver is the one you haven't yet considered. Prepare for the psychological siege daily. The strength of not responding is the ultimate declaration of self-possession. It is the silent, crushing acknowledgement that your time, your focus, and your inner terrain are sovereign territory, and you will not grant visas or access rights to every petty aggressor who rattles the fence line. Let them exhaust their ammunition. Let them waste their precious mental energy on the impenetrable fortress of your silence. Let them believe they have delivered a fatal blow. The victory is not loud. It is the overwhelming, undeniable absence of noise and the unwavering persistence toward your superior objective. The campaign continues. Hold the line, remain silent, win the war.